Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Songwriting Simplified on this 10th of May 2023. And I apologize for being nearly 15 minutes late. I basically had a bit of an audio problem with getting audio into OBS. And I basically had no audio at all. All my settings were correct, and I just had nothing going into OBS at all. And I don't know why. But I fixed it, as you can probably tell, because OBS is fine and audio is going through, and hopefully you guys can hear everything, which is what we want. So, yeah, I'm not sure why my audio settings were all completely nulled out. So I had to go and reconfigure everything. And then I needed to make some test recordings to make sure that they were all set correctly. So that it wasn't all, a complete mess. But, so that's why, I was late getting started. And, fortunately, it only took me maybe about 5 or 6 minutes to fix, because I reported to you guys that I was having a tech problem at about 7 minutes late. So it only took us a few minutes to get it sorted out. But everything is working, which is cool. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to the show. I hope everybody has had a good few days since Sunday's show, which was a classic, great Sunday Night Live show. It was really, really good. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. We were a little low on numbers last time, but that happens at this time of year. This time of year, we tend to have fewer people that are around that watch the show. But hopefully, things will pick up and we'll get more people in. And certainly tonight, I'm hoping that things will pick up as well. Let's go see, kind of where we're at. We've only got like 11 people here, but hopefully we'll pick up and we'll get some more people in here. Otherwise, this is going to be a very, very short show. All right, so Billy Morgan was the first in the door, nearly like 2.5 hours before showtime. John Hawk is here. Kevin from Kevin's Guitar Stories is here. Just Bob is here as well. And Christopher is here. And Wayne is here. Don Oliver is here. Bobby Booth is here. And Brett Marla is here. Christopher's asking a bit of a question, which we'll get to in just a minute. Bobby Booth says everything is okay, which is cool. Brett Marler says, sounds like a load of OBS. That's very good. I like that joke. That's very good. And that's it so far. So not very many people here. So please go spread the word and grab people and force them to attend. No, I'm only kidding. Don't force them to attend. But yeah, it would be great if we could get some more people in here and get some good songwriting, arranging, composing, and music theory questions into tonight's show. That would be awesome. And Glenn from Montreal is here, also known as United Effect, which is awesome. Bobby Booth says, can't drive now, so no place to go. Bobby, you are pretty much here for like everything I do. And you have been here since the very beginning of not only Songwriting Simplified, but the very beginning of any live streams that I ever did, which was way back 5 years ago. We're talking way back in 2017 when I started doing live streams. You've been here since the very beginning, and you've hardly missed a thing, which is cool. So thank you very much, Bobby, for all of your support over the last several years, because way back when we first started, the audio was mono. And the picture was terrible. It was pixelated and lighting was terrible. I basically lit it with like one light bulb pointed to my face and an overhead light. And that was all I had. And I had terrible internet. So the picture would freeze, the audio would get summed to mono sometimes. It was pretty awful. But we got through it. We did that for, about 18 months, and then we moved to the other studio just basically about half a mile away. And suddenly our internet was loads better, and the show has been fantastic ever since. And technology, we've been able to improve loads. Yeah, some may be on the Massachusetts meetup. Yes, I had forgotten that was on tonight. Otherwise, I might have actually cancelled tonight's show and just said, "Hey, everybody, go over to Massachusetts and help that meetup out." So we will, in that case, we will keep this short, just so that I can allow people just to go over to that. Okay, let's get to Christopher's question. He says, I'm prone to using, on occasion, a Yamaha Genos and a Yamaha SX900 workstation arranger keyboard. Does the use of the rhythm section qualify as cheating? No, it does not. Providing you are inputting, the chord changes into the rhythm section, I don't think that qualifies as cheating, because that's pretty much the same as using Easy Drummer or Easy Bass or Easy Keys or something like that has some, preset riffs and motifs and things like that. And of course there are, for those of us that don't play guitar, there are guitar strumming VSTs that you can get, which are really, really good and provide you with a bunch of strumming patterns. So that basically all you do is you just hold down, for example, G-7 chord on the keyboard, and you get a guitar strumming this G-7 chord, and it sounds great. Nothing wrong with any of those at all. I have a workstation. This is ancient. This is the Yamaha QS300 from about 1993, 1994. And this, by the way, was the very first unit to come into the UK, which Yamaha sent me. And it's been run over by a truck, and yet it still works. It's very, very cool. I'm very glad it still works. And you could argue that I'm cheating because, although I do play a little bit of flugelhorn, I don't sound anywhere near that good. And yet, in this, in my opening credits music, I have a really good sounding flugelhorn. This is the one that's in Presence XT. Sounds great. It's even got a little bit of vibrato. The secret sauce with playing anything that is a VST or a virtual instrument is to think like you are playing that instrument. So remembering to breathe, don't hold a note down for 10 minutes. Because most flugelhorn players or trumpet players cannot hold that for that long. So don't do it. Make sure you phrase things nice and evenly, and you leave some nice little spaces. Not only because that makes better musical sense, but also because it's going to sound much more realistic, because brass players, woodwind players, saxophone players, anybody that is blowing any instrument needs to be able to breathe. So think about that and make sure you leave space in what you do on the instrument to make sure that there is, that there is space and it's nice and realistic. The other thing to be sure about is don't play too low. Flugelhorns don't go down that low. Most flugelhorn players will never be able to hit that note. There's probably pretty good. And that's probably, yeah, this F at the top here is probably your upper limit of what you could get out of a flugelhorn realistically. So kind of stay within what is, you know, the accepted physical playing register of the instrument that you are emulating. So in this case, a flugelhorn. Don't go so low that it sounds like a tuba. Don't go so high that it sounds like a dog whistle, because most, and I'm saying the vast majority, 98 maybe % of flugelhorn players really cannot go that high. And they certainly 100% of flugelhorn players cannot go that low, because the instrument physically doesn't do it. So bear that in mind. I know I've kind of expanded upon the question a wee bit to include virtual instruments, but I think it's important. If you're using virtual instruments of any kind, whether it's something like Easy Drummer or Easy Bass or Easy Keys, a lot of the things that you'll get in those kind of virtual instruments will be kind of limited by the range and register of the instrument for the most part. But, you know, you've also got to avoid playing things that are not actually possible on the instrument. Okay, so be careful about that. But that's a good question, Christopher. Thank you for that one. Just Bob says, busy watching a tree that overhangs my house from neighbor's property get cut down. Warned them not to drop on my house. They are cutting from neighbor's property. Worst possible angle. Yeah, that sounds suspect. And I hope that you don't end up with any property damage as a result. Okay, so let's see. Brett says, do you use key changes in your works? And if so, what tricks do you use to modulate to them? I do. And I've actually modulated from, you know, distant keys from the key that I'm in to a distant key. I've done this before, where I might be in B flat. So, you know, the majority of my song is in B flat. So I'm here for the most part. And then I have a chorus that's in E, for example. So that's an interval of an augmented fourth or diminished fifth, depending upon, you know, whichever version you go for. Depends upon your outlook on life. If you're a happy kind of guy, then you're going to go for the augmented fourth, the raised fourth rather than the flatted fifth. But it's essentially the same interval. It's a bit of a weird one, going from B flat to E. Sounds very odd. So how do you get to that? Well, there are subtle ways to do it. One thing you could do is you could go... So you're just doing a little 5 to 1 to jump from one key to another. 5, just using, rather than using a 2-5-1, just using a 5-1 can be a real shortcut way to get there. Another thing you can do is actually do the 5-1 in the bass, but have a different chord. So instead of maybe the B7 to take you to E, maybe let's go back to the key of B flat. So maybe do G with the B in the bass. That would also do it. So, or just pivot by one note. So for example, so, you know, if I wanted to go, let's say I wanted to go to the key of D major from B flat, which is not that distant. We're only talking there. So I could do this. And now I'm in D major. And now I'm back in B flat again. And now I'm back in D again. So basically I'm doing G over B, A over C sharp, D. So it's a little bit kind of sneaky, I guess, but it's still using basic rudiments of music theory to make it work and work effectively. So, I mean, let's take, for example, my song Paper Deity from my 2016 EP. Basically, it's all based around this vamp. Chorus. Hang on. And then we go back to here again. But in order to get to my bridge, which takes me to a different key, takes me to the key of E from the key of D, so we're going up a step. I use this little turnaround here, where I'm going F over A, G over B, and then that takes me to E major. So the pivot chord is that G over B. So get back to the key of D, or at least in this particular case, I'm pretending that I'm going back to the key of D, but I don't. Watch what happens. I go E, G flat major, G7, A7, and everyone's expecting me to go back to here. But I don't do that on the record. Watch what I do. I've jumped to the key of E flat, not even by using a chord 5, which is what you'd expect me to do. Because that's chord 5, that's A7 going to D. Basically, that's what that is. If I simplify the chords, I'm just going, 4, 5, 1 in D. But I don't do that on the record. I go to E flat instead. That weird interval leap between the A and the E flat, which is, again, that's that flatted fifth kind of thing again. But the reason why it works is because there's a pivot note. There's a hidden pivot note. I call it a plant. is the plant. Basically, it's this note at the top here, which resolves upper tone. It's a top note, and it just resolves upper tone. And that's why you get away with it. That's how I get away with it in that particular case. So, there's tricks you can do. You can either just do the straight 5-1, you know, so from B flat major, chord 5 to E major, and that takes you to the key of E just with a chord 5. And then go back just by a 5-1. So that was basically just a series of 5-1, 5-1, 5-1 in different keys until I got my way back to B flat. So that is basically how I do modulation between one key and another. And essentially that little formula, either 2-5-1 or just 5-1, will go from one key that you're in to any other. It just totally unlocks the whole thing. It's very, very powerful. So learn your chord 5s and learn your 2-5-1s in every key so that you know what you need to do to get to a different key. So in the case of going from B flat to E major, make sure you know what your 2-5-1 is in E major. It's going to be F sharp minor, B7, E. Okay, same in C major, D minor 7, G7, C. Learn all of those. A7 over C sharp takes me to D minor or D major. In that case, I'm going to go for D minor. And then chord 5, which is G and C. Okay, so that's how I get away with it. Let's see, Mike Johnson is here, which is awesome. Thank you for coming, Mike. Brett says, thanks for making me feel old. I was a senior in high school when that workstation was built. Yes, I was just starting university, actually, to do my undergraduate jazz composition degree. I was literally just starting when it came out. And by this point, you know, I had been around in the music business a wee while, and Yamaha were very kind and helped me out. And they said, yes, we'll send you this device to test. And so I did. Let's see, what else do we have? That's great all sounding arranging advice. Yes, yeah. 2-5-1s are one of the most powerful chord changes that there is in music. They are incredibly powerful whether you're playing jazz or whether you're playing pop or folk or classical. Whatever is your take on music, they are really, really powerful. I mean, they are especially helpful in jazz because you can use them for improvisation, and a whole lot of jazz standards are built around 2-5-1s, or the extension thereof, which is 3-6-2-5-1. And so it helps to know all of the notes that are available from those chords that you can improvise on to get from one place to another. So that's why they are incredibly powerful and useful to know if you're going to get involved in jazz and improvisation. So yeah. All right. Let's see. Where are we? We are. We're not anywhere near halfway through the show yet because I started like 10-12 minutes late. So, but like I said, we'll keep it a little bit shorter so that, you know, if you want to go to the Studio One meetup, no problem, you can get there. I don't have a problem with that. Any other questions, guys? Otherwise, this might be the shortest Songwriting Simplified show we've ever done. And I would definitely like to take some more questions. But these are really good. Modulation questions. I like modulating. It's very, very powerful. And it kind of goes, it kind of builds on what we've been talking about, different chord types. You know, we've talked about, you know, tritones. We've talked about triads, 3-note chords. And we've talked about inversions. So the combination of using the right inversion of a chord, to get where you want to get to. Okay, so making sure you have the right inversion for the chord is important, because you want to get the chords to move nice and smoothly between each other. So when you're doing a 2-5-1, let's say we're doing one in C. So D minor, G, C. Make sure it's... See how smoothly those chords go, rather than going... which isn't smooth at all, because there's a big leap between... Okay, so decide which inversion of the chord you're going to use for chord 2. Depends kind of like how low down in voicing you want to go. So let's say I'm going to start this low down, because that's maybe where the melody is. Maybe that's my melody. So, little chromatic passing note there. And I'm ending on middle C. So that's fine if my melody is low down. But what if my melody is a little bit higher? So let's say my melody starts on the A. See how the voice leading was nice and smooth there as well? So that's where it is important to know all of your inversions. So in this case, when you're working with triads, you've only got root position, which is where the root of the chord, C, is at the lowest note. And then first inversion, with the third at the bottom, second inversion with the fifth at the bottom. And those in themselves can be useful for making a melody. In fact, I think Mozart did that. I think that was a little melody of his. And that's basically position C major, first inversion, second inversion, and then maybe back, so, you know. So that's nice and smooth. So think about those kind of things. Billy's got a link to the Studio One meetup if you want to go. Brett Mahler says, sometimes allowing a drum fill can serve as a transition, not only from a section, but can also lead into a key change. Definitely. And in fact, a good drum fill can help build up that tension going into a new key. You know, especially if you really want to amp up and make the key change obvious. So if you're wanting to go for really obvious, you could do something like this. and so on. And that was me basically playing the same thing, but keeping on going up. So if you imagine a drum set, just like building up over those fills, and then, you know, playing a more extravagant beat, a more extravagant pattern each time you go up. So maybe starting fairly simple, and then maybe adding the bell of the ride on the upbeat eighth notes in that in the next section in the new key, for example. So nice big drum fill, would sound really, really cool, and would really help drive that section forward. So a good drum fill is essential, especially when you're changing key, if you're going to make the key change really obvious like that. Depends upon what you're doing. Let's see. Christopher says, how would you set up an 18-piece string section virtually? You would use different instances of whatever you are using for your orchestra. So if you're using the Persona Symphony Orchestra, or if you're using the BBC one, or you're using Albion, or you're using whatever it might be, or East West, or whatever it is you're using. The thing you've got to remember is that string sections, even if it's something like an 18-piece string chamber orchestra, you've got first violins, second violins, violas, cellos, celli is the plural of cellos, and then you've got basses. So you've got 5 sections. And so first violins tend to play a lot of the higher notes. And then second violins will play a little bit below that. And then you've got violas. And then below that, you've got cello. And then below that, you've got basses bringing up the rear on the low end. So when you're voicing, remember that first violins tend to be divided into 2. They're not always, but quite often, if you want a nice big sound, you would divide first violins into 2 parts. So like, you know, 1A and 1B, and then the same for second violins, 1A and 1B, and then maybe you might do the same with violas. Mostly you probably wouldn't, but certainly you could do that for violins, and we call that divisi. Literally, it's the Italian for dividing. Okay, so in this case, you would have the upper note played by player 1 of your first violins, and then player 2, sounds like a computer game, but player 2 would be playing the lower notes. So quite often they would be written on a part, like if you've got first violin parts, everyone who is a first violin player would have the same chart. And when it says divisi and you've got 2 notes, that's not asking the violinist to double stop, unless it actually says double stops in the score. But if it doesn't say double stops and it says divisi, then that means that half of you play up the top note, half of you play the lower note. And so that is something that gets that gets decided by a combination of the concertmaster, who tends to be the principal violinist, and the conductor. So if you're talking virtual, you need to replicate that. So, and that's actually pretty easy because you don't actually have real players to instruct. Say, hey, you're playing the top part, you're playing the bottom part, you're playing the top part, you're playing the bottom part. You can just do that when you're playing your notes in. Okay? But again, think about range and register of each of the instruments. How high can they go? How low can they go? What sounds realistic? What doesn't sound realistic? And stick to those like glue. And make sure that you phrase. Don't just play an endless string of notes. Make sure you provide some phrasing. Now, in something like Notion, our Notion notation software called Notion or Notion Mobile, there is such a thing as phrase markings. So if you have a section of melody, maybe it goes like that, which ends on a musical comma. and maybe you'd repeat that and then resolve it down to the C. So that whole phrase, you would give one phrase marking. And what this tells the player is to play this as one little line, as like a musical sentence. And so that would help them decide whether they start, when they start with a down bow, how long they need to draw the bow across the strings before they go into up bowing and then down bowing again. So there's things like that to consider. But the cool thing about virtual instruments is you don't have to think about the bowing. For the most part, the virtual instrument, if it's a really good one, will take care of that for you. So would you place first and second violins next or opposed? I'm not quite sure what you mean by next or opposed. Because sometimes you can have first violins playing, close together like that. A semitone apart. But sometimes they'll play thirds apart. Okay, so sometimes they'll play thirds apart, sometimes they can be seconds apart. But they usually resolve when you have that because that's a dissonance. So when you're writing for strings, for the most part, you want to resolve all of those dissonances rather than just going. And try and avoid things like this. Those kind of intervals don't sound great. That's an interval of a major 7 or a flatted ninth. Try and avoid those, especially if you're going to descend like this. It doesn't sound very pleasant, particularly on violins. It sounds horrible. So avoid those kind of clashes as well. Oh, from the conductor's position. Yeah, you would do that with panning. So have a look at how the orchestra sits. There are loads of charts that you can see on the internet. Just Google, orchestral seating. Where do they sit? And you'll see loads of charts come up that will show you where first violins and second violins, violas, cellos, and where the basses all sit. And then the secret is panning. So you use panning in the mixer in Studio One to place those instruments where they should be and where you would expect the audience perspective to hear them. So imagine that the audience is sat in the sweet spot, in the center of the stage, effectively, kind of looking at the stage. Then if you've got first violin slightly on the left, second violin slightly on the right, make the panning that way. And then if you've got violas in the middle and cellos just slightly off from that, do that. Same with basses. Basses, I would not be strict about panning for basses. I would just put them up the middle. And then do the same for woodwinds if you're going to have a full orchestra, and then do the same for brass. Make sure they're panned where they would be if they were seated on a stage. So you do it all from audience perspective. Okay? And you'll get some good results if you do that. I've played in orchestras that use different place arrangements. What is your opinion? That tends to be up to the conductor. I would just say look at what the most common seating arrangement is for orchestra. Find what's the most common and then go with that. And, pan your instruments according to what is most common. And you'll be fine. That would be my advice. Just Bob has a site that has a diagram of instruments in the orchestra pit. So go check that out. And that's from the Britannica. So pretty authoritative. I would definitely check that out. Sounded very Days of Our Lives. Days of Our Lives. Oh my gosh. I try studiously to avoid Days of Our Lives, but that's a rarity for me. I will try. I will do better. I will do better at trying to avoid Days of Our Lives. But yeah, so strings, writing for strings. It can be a fun thing to do. And I recommend that you have strings in a song at least once in your career as a songwriter or as an arranger. Definitely worth doing. And the other thing that's definitely worth doing is checking out the Persona Symphony Orchestra. It's an add-on for Studio One. It's not just available. But if you have Presonisphere, then it's something that you get. And I want this one. Okay. Let's go over to Studio One. So I've got Presence Open, which is where the Persona Symphony Orchestra lives, by the way. So when you purchase Persona Symphony Orchestra, and you're looking, going, I don't know where it is, I don't know where it is. It's all loaded up into Presence, okay? So this is the big string section, which sounds really, really quite nice, actually. Sounds pretty nice. And of course, it sounds even better when you've got some reverb on it. So there you go. Let's see. Secret Squirrel says, how would the pitch shift if they're acting as a supporting element for a contemporary rock concert? Where would the elements of the rock band be placed among the pit elements? Okay, so if you're talking about having an orchestra with a rock band, which definitely has been done, I would suggest you keep the panning of the orchestral elements as standard, and then how you have your rock band, also have them panned as standard as well. And then you have to decide which elements are important and which elements are less important, and then use a combination of different reverb amounts and different amounts of compression to set the front and the back. So if your rock band is the focus and the orchestral elements are in the background, you can use some compression and some reverb to push them further back in the mix, and then have your guitars and your drums and your bass and your keyboards, those kind of things, have them more up front. Maybe you use some parallel compression on the rock band elements and don't use any on the orchestral elements. And so you keep the rock band up front and in focus because they are the most important thing, and then the orchestral elements sit behind them, using fader balancing, compression, and reverbs. Reverbs are great because reverbs will push things further back in the mix and give you that depth of field. So if you want your strings and other orchestral elements to be further back in the mix, just, use generous amounts of reverb to do that, as well as a little bit of compression. Now, when I'm talking compression, the compression needs to be smooth. You don't want to have, transients that get really clamped down quickly, necessarily. You want maybe some nice smooth tube style compression or something like that. And then, use much more aggressive compression on your rock band elements so that those guys are always nice and up front and everything else is sat behind it. But I would say keep the panning fairly traditional for both the band and the orchestra. And then use EQ as well as compression and reverbs to get the elements to separate out. So, if guitars and violins are sharing the same kind of EQ space, do some complementary EQ so that your guitars are always the ones that are up front. So if your guitars are nice and bright and aggressive sounding, then maybe cut some of the top end of the strings. Make the strings a little bit darker to contrast and also fit those jigsaw puzzle pieces together better. Okay, so You're keeping the panning and everything else traditional, but you're using EQ to get the vast majority of your separation between your elements done. So that the orchestral elements stay in the background and the rock band are up front. And then if you need to, give a flute player or the woodwind section like oboes and clarinets, you need them to have a little bit of focus for a particular part of the song. That's great. You can use automation to bring them up front, and then set everything else back at that point. So automation is going to be your best friend, EQ is going to be your best friend, and reverbs and compression are definitely your best friends when it comes to doing something big like that, an orchestra and a rock band together. It's not impossible, but it is a lot of work. So be prepared for, if you're mixing such a thing, to take a good long time to do. But of course, before you even get to the mixing phase, make sure that your arranging does a lot of the job for you. So if your rock band elements are the most important thing in the song at a certain juncture in the song, then orchestrate it that way. Make sure that the guitars are nice and loud in your arrangement, and the other things are less important. So maybe keep them out of the way of each other. So when your lead guitar is playing, don't have any flutes or oboes or any upper woodwinds at all. Just rely upon lower strings, lower woodwinds, and lower brass instruments, so that they juxtapose between the guitars, who now have all that upper register and upper mid-range. Allow them in your arrangement to dominate, and then don't write for the upper woodwinds and upper strings, because they're going to get in the way of each other. So do it in your arrangement primarily, and then do the rest with the mixing to just basically enhance what you've done with the arrangement. Which is why when you see mix engineers and recording engineers, when they're recording something like a project like an orchestra with a rock band, when you see them doing that, what you see is the score for the piece spread out across the mixing console. Why do they do that? Because you need to be able to see what's in the score and what's going on to be able to make your mixing decisions and make your recording decisions about what's going to go where and how it's going to go, and your fader rides and that kind of thing. It's important to know what's going on and when certain things are happening. So even if there is no score and you're using entirely virtual instruments, know your arrangement inside out, backwards, sideways, forwards, upside down, so that when you come to doing the mixing for your song, when you've finished recording it, you know when to automate different things in, when to bring different things more forward in the mix, when to take them back, and all of that kind of thing. Because you know your arrangement. Okay, the strings are the focus here, guitars not so much. I can make the guitars darker with automated EQ, or I can just do volume automation. So there are always options, but those are the ones that I would choose. Based on the example just Bob shared, how would the ensemble and band placement sit for hybrid performance? Yeah, pretty much like I said. Have them sit, if you're talking real people, have them sit in the normal places that you would expect. Because if you start doing weird things with panning that are not standard, then you'll put the whole thing out of balance. So pan things and have things placed like you normally would for a rock band. So if you've got 4 guitars, for example, how are you going to pan those guitars in a normal rock band setting? Forget the orchestra for now. Pan those. Then when it comes to the orchestra, how's the orchestra traditionally set up? Pan those. Do it that way. And then use all the other tools that I just talked about to get the separation that you need, so that they're getting out of each other's way. And of course, if you want something to come to the fore, like woodwinds, you can make the woodwinds, instead of being panned kind of like this, you can make them mono and turn them up, bring them forward, and then put them back again. There's lots of different things you can do. Brett says, luckily Presence XT knows the ranges of the instruments. It is simulating and hence does a lot of that work for us. Exactly right. Chris says, I just recorded that so I can play it as I go to sleep. Thank you very much. That's very kind. Zero Squirrel says, fascinating. Thank you very much for simplifying that for me. The answer was relatively simple and you helped remind me to get out of my head to seek less complex solutions. Yeah, the best answers are usually the most simple ones, to be honest. All right, we will call it there because we are now pretty much at the hour mark for the show. Thank you very much, everybody, for your great questions. They were actually really, really good. And although we only peaked at 14, I understand that there's the meetup going on. So I'm going to let you all go now so that you can go to that meetup and go and have a good discussion over there and maybe take some of the discussion from this show over there as well. And maybe, if there are people in that meetup that you've never met before, tell them about this show and tell them what you learned and get them to subscribe, get them to come along and check it out. And it'd be a really great and useful way to grow the audience. So thank you, everybody. And I will see you all on Sunday for Sunday Night Live. And I think I might have a nice little surprise for you guys. I have a few things in the works that I'm working on. I need to talk to a particular individual to see if we get the green light on this. But if I get the green light, there's going to be a nice surprise for Sunday. All right, folks, I'm going to bid you all a very good night. And I will see you, as I said, on Sunday. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, everybody, for coming. And thank you for your patience whilst I sorted out my audio issues. I'm very glad it's all sorted out now. I think I know what it was. I think the update for OBS that I did last week pretty much bummed out all of my audio settings. So that's probably what happened. All right, folks, I'll see you Sunday. Good night.
Bye.